They called him a fool for saving the killer horse, but no one was laughing when the truth came out. The whole town laughed when Jacob Hill stepped into the rain and claimed the horse that killed a man. They said he'd lost his mind. That mercy had no place in a world like theirs. But when fire came, when fear turned to ashes, that same monster would show them what real humanity looked like. The town hall smelled of old wood and wet boots. Outside, rain had turned Main Street into a mirror of mud and neon reflections from the diner across the road. Inside, the townspeople packed, shoulder to shoulder, voices sharp, anger thick in the air. On the makeshift stage, under a flickering light, stood Sheriff Mark Reeves, his hat clenched in his hand. "Folks," he said, voice cracking through the noise, "that horse killed a man. It's dangerous. The state says we put it down before it hurts anyone else." Applause broke out, short, satisfied, almost cruel. People needed something to hate, and tonight, they'd found it. At the back of the room, Jacob Hill shifted his weight. His hands were rough and stained with soil, the kind of hands that once held a family, and now only held silence. He hadn't spoken in a public place for years. But when he heard the word kill, something in him stirred, an echo of a memory he'd tried to bury. He cleared his throat. "I'll take it." The room went still. Heads turned. Someone snorted. Another man barked a laugh. "You'll what?" Sheriff Mark asked. Jacob stood, his voice steady but low. "The horse. I'll take it. You don't need to kill it." The silence that followed was crueler than laughter. Then came the noise. First a chuckle, then a wave of it, rolling through the hall until even the sheriff's lips twitched. "Jacob," said a woman from the corner, "you couldn't save your own family. How you gonna save that monster?" The words landed like a slap. Jacob didn't answer. He just looked at the sheriff, eyes dull but unflinching. "It deserves a chance," he said quietly. "Same as any of us." "Any of us?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "That horse tore a man apart." Jacob nodded once. "And maybe someone tore it apart first." Gasps scattered through the room. Outside, thunder grumbled far off, but Jacob's face stayed still. In that silence, for just a heartbeat, something human flickered behind the sheriff's eyes. Pity, maybe, or recognition. "You're out of your damn mind," someone shouted. "You'll be dead in a week." "Maybe," Jacob said, reaching for his old coat. "But at least it won't die alone." He turned and walked out. The door slammed against the wind, and laughter followed him into the rain. The night swallowed him whole. His truck sat waiting, the headlights cutting through the mist like two tired eyes. In the back, under a tarp, lay the steel gate they used to cage the horse. He could still hear its sounds, echoing from the holding yard, metal scraping, hooves thrashing against concrete, breath ragged like it was trying to remember what freedom felt like. When Jacob arrived, the guards hesitated. One of them spat on the ground. "You really want to die, old man?" Jacob signed the paper, his handwriting slow but firm. "We all die," he said. "Some just get to live first." They led him to the pen. Raven was larger than he imagined. Black as midnight, scars webbed across its chest, eyes wide and glinting with something between terror and rage. Its mane was tangled with dried blood, its breath visible in the cold air. "Don't get close," one guard warned. "It hates people." Jacob stepped forward anyway. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He simply stood there, breathing quietly, steady, as if waiting for the storm to decide whether to pass or strike. Raven's nostrils flared. For a moment, their eyes met. Jacob saw no monster, only panic. A creature trapped too long, punished too often. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself after the accident, the one that took his wife and son on a night just like this, rain drumming against the windshield, his hands too slow on the brakes. "Easy now," he whispered. "No one's gonna hurt you anymore." The horse's ears twitched. Its hooves pawed the ground once, twice, but it didn't charge. One of the guards laughed nervously. "You're lucky tonight," he said. "It's too tired to kill you." Jacob ignored him. He picked up the lead rope, careful, slow. The steel gate opened with a groan. For a moment, everything froze. The air, the men, even the rain. Then Raven took a step forward, trembling, uncertain. Jacob didn't pull. He just walked beside it, one cautious step after another, through the puddles and out into the waiting dark. The guards watched as the truck door shut and the headlights disappeared down the long road out of town. One of them muttered, "He'll never make it home alive." The drive was long and quiet. The only sound was the chain clinking softly in the back and the rain on the windshield. Jacob didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need noise. He needed silence, the kind that lets old pain breathe. Halfway down the dirt road, he stopped. The rain had eased, leaving the smell of wet earth and pine. He turned off the engine. Behind him, Raven shifted restlessly. Jacob stepped out and lifted the tarp. "You're safe now," he murmured, voice barely audible. "We'll figure this out." The horse blinked, nostrils flaring. Jacob thought of his wife's voice, gentle and certain, saying years ago, "You can't fix everything, Jacob. Some things just need time." Maybe that's all this was, a second chance neither of them deserved, but both needed. He climbed back into the truck and started the engine. In the mirror, the faint glow of the town disappeared behind the trees. Ahead lay the broken fence line of his farm. His home, forgotten by most, but not by the ghosts that lived there. The rain had stopped when he pulled in. He cut the engine and listened. No laughter now, just the steady rhythm of Raven's breath and the soft creak of the old barn door swinging in the wind. Jacob opened the gate, led the horse into the shadows, and whispered again, "You're home." The wind carried that word across the dark fields, a fragile promise between two broken souls, one man, one beast, both condemned by others, both still standing. And though the laughter from town still echoed faintly in the distance, something inside Jacob Hill had gone quiet for the first time in years. The rain had stopped by the time Jacob turned down the long dirt road that led to his farm. The truck bounced over potholes and puddles, headlights slicing through the mist. In the rearview mirror, Raven's dark shape shifted in the trailer. Silent, watchful, its breath steaming faintly in the cold. The fields stretched wide and gray around them, and the only sound was gravel under the tires and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves shifting behind him. Jacob hadn't been down this road in weeks. Grass had overgrown the edges. The mailbox leaned crooked, rusted and dented like everything else he owned. The place had a way of pushing people out, of swallowing memories and never giving them back. But tonight, it felt different. He wasn't coming home alone. He pulled into the yard and cut the engine. For a long while, neither he nor the horse moved. The world held its breath. Then, slowly, he climbed out, boots sinking into wet mud. He walked to the trailer, unlatched the door, and whispered, Easy now. Raven stepped down, massive, trembling, every muscle tense, as if expecting another blow. The scent of damp hay and old wood hung in the air. The barn stood half-collapsed, its roof sagging under years of neglect. A single lantern swung from a nail, its flame small and warm against the dark. Jacob led Raven toward it, each step slow, deliberate. The horse snorted, jerking its head once, but didn't rear. The chain between them clinked softly, echoing like a heartbeat in the empty night. When they reached the stall, Jacob let the rope slip from his hands. He didn't tie it, didn't trap it, just left the gate open and backed away. "You're free to stay or go," he murmured. Raven stood still, sides heaving. Then it turned, walked into the stall, and stopped. Jacob felt something shift inside him, something small but undeniable. He exhaled, long and slow, as though releasing years of held breath. Inside the barn, the walls were lined with ghosts. An old saddle hung crooked on the rail. A child's drawing, yellowed and torn, clung to a beam near the window. It was a crayon sketch of a horse and a man standing in a field, his son's work from years ago. He reached up, fingertips brushing the edge of the paper, and felt his throat tighten. He whispered to the shadows, "Guess you've got company now, kid." Behind him, Raven shifted, hooves scraping the floor. Jacob turned to see the horse watching him, ears forward, muscles tight, eyes sharp as polished obsidian. For a moment, neither moved. Then Raven lowered its head slightly, snorting a breath that sounded almost human in its exhaustion. Jacob poured oats into a bucket, the sound steady and calm. "You'll need your strength," he said softly. "Tomorrow, we start again." The horse didn't approach, not yet. But it didn't turn away either. That was enough. By morning, mist rolled off the fields like a living thing. Jacob stood by the porch steps, coffee steaming in his hand, staring at the gray horizon. The barn door was still open. Inside, Raven stood where he'd left it, a dark silhouette in the light. He couldn't remember the last time the farm had felt alive. Birds returned to the fence line. The wind carried the scent of wet soil and cedar. For the first time in years, he didn't mind the silence. He spent the day repairing the fence, hammer striking rhythmically against the posts. Sweat and mud mixed on his arms. Each nail driven into the wood felt like reclaiming a piece of his own strength. Raven watched from the distance, ears flicking, tail swishing lazily. It didn't bolt when Jacob passed by. That, too, felt like progress. Later, as the sun began to fall, a truck slowed at the gate. It was Sheriff Mark. He stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning the yard. "You're really doing this," he said. Jacob nodded. Mark tilted his hat back, squinting toward the barn. "People in town are talking. They think you're suicidal. Let them talk." The sheriff sighed. "You can't fix what's broken, Jacob. That animal's got blood on it." "So do we all," Jacob answered. His tone wasn't defiant, just tired. Mark studied him for a moment longer, then shook his head and climbed back into his truck. "Don't say I didn't warn you." As the taillights faded, Jacob turned back to the barn. The horse was watching him again. Its gaze followed him with quiet suspicion, but no longer fear. "You and me both," Jacob whispered. "They don't believe in either of us." He tossed a blanket over the stall door. The evening light slanted through the cracks, painting the barn in thin gold stripes. Dust floated like soft ash in the air. Raven shifted, lowering its head to the feed bucket. The simple sound of chewing filled the space, steady, grounding, alive. Jacob sat on an overturned bucket outside the stall, elbows resting on his knees. The quiet wrapped around him like an old coat. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. He thought about the laughter from town, how it had followed him into the rain. Now it seemed far away, meaningless. He looked at the horse and said, "They think we're both monsters. Guess we'll have to prove 'em wrong." Raven raised its head, one ear flicking toward the sound of his voice. Jacob smiled faintly, something raw and human cracking open inside him. The lamp burned low. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wild sage. He stayed there until the stars came out, until his coffee turned cold, until the walls no longer felt like a prison, but a shelter. When he finally rose, Raven was lying down, its massive body curled in the straw. A creature that had learned, if only for a night, that peace was possible. Jacob whispered to the dark, "Good night, partner." And for the first time in years, he slept without dreaming. By the third morning, the town had already decided Jacob Hill had lost his mind. The local paper, the Weston County Chronicle, ran a short column with a photo of his battered truck under the headline, "Farmer Adopts Killer Horse." It was printed between an ad for farm insurance and a funeral home notice. Ironic, some said. Others just laughed. The whispers spread faster than the wind, curling down every diner booth and bar counter. At the general store, Martha Sloan overheard two men talking while weighing seed. "He's gone mad," one said. "That horse should have been put down weeks ago." "He thinks he's some kind of savior," the other muttered. "Maybe it'll save us the trouble and kill him too." They chuckled, coins clinking on the counter. Martha didn't laugh. She'd known Jacob years ago, back when he'd bring his little boy into town, the kid riding on his shoulders, both of them grinning like summer itself. That was before the accident, before the silence settled around him like a shroud. She left the store without buying a thing. Across the fields, Jacob was mending the gate again. The morning sun had burned through the mist, and the air smelled of wet pine and iron. Raven watched him from inside the paddock, its ears twitching at the clang of the hammer. Each strike echoed through the stillness. Jacob's movements were slow but sure, measured like a man who understood the rhythm of broken things. He paused to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "You see?" he said aloud, not turning. "Things can hold together again. Just takes patience." Raven exhaled, a soft huff of air that almost sounded like an answer. Jacob smiled at the sound. That afternoon, the first visitor came. A teenage boy on a dirt bike, wearing a ball cap turned backward. He stopped by the fence and stared at the horse, wide-eyed. "That the killer?" he called. Jacob set his tools down. "That's the horse," he said evenly. The boy laughed, nervous and thrilled all at once. "Looks mean. Bet it'd rip you in half if it wanted." "Maybe," Jacob replied. "Or maybe it's just tired of being scared." The boy frowned, not knowing what to say. He revved the engine, sprayed dirt, and sped off. But the next morning there were boot prints along the fence. 2, maybe 3 pairs. Someone had been watching. That night, Jacob found the words, "Monsters," "Friend," scrawled across the barn door in red paint. The letters dripped like blood. For a long time, he stood staring at them, the lantern flame flickering in his eyes. He didn't curse, didn't shout. just took a rag and bucket and began to wash the paint away. Each stroke erased a little more until only the faint ghost of the words remained. Raven stood silently behind him, its breath slow and steady, visible in the cold. When Martha arrived the next morning, she found him there. Mud on his boots, red stains on his sleeves, the barn door clean again. She carried a bag of medical supplies and 2 loaves of fresh bread. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment, then back to the horse. "People talk," he said. "That's what they do." "They're scared," she replied. "So is he." Martha studied Raven through the slats of the stall. The horse's eyes were dark, unreadable. "If it really killed someone," she started, but Jacob cut her off. "It didn't mean to," he said. His voice was low, firm, but not angry. "Fear makes you dangerous. You ever see an animal that's been cornered?" "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes they never come back." He nodded. "Maybe that's why we get along." She left the bread on the table and began treating Raven's scars. The horse flinched once, but didn't strike. Its hide twitched beneath her hands, muscles rippling. Jacob watched in silence as Martha whispered to it, her voice steady and gentle. When they finished, Raven lowered its head, nostrils brushing against her sleeve. Martha looked up, surprised. "He remembers kindness," she said. Jacob's lips curved in a faint, tired smile. "So do people. Sometimes." That evening, the wind picked up again. Jacob sat on the porch steps, listening to the creak of the barn door, the distant hum of crickets. From somewhere down the road, faint voices carried. A group of men laughing. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew their tone. He'd heard it before, years ago, the night after the accident, when they'd said he shouldn't have been driving, that it was his fault. He swallowed hard and looked toward the barn, where a single lantern glowed behind the wooden slats. The light pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, Raven stood restless, shifting its weight. The faint clink of its chain echoed. Jacob rose, walked inside, and unlatched the door. The horse stiffened, eyes wide. "It's okay," Jacob said softly. "No one's coming tonight." He moved closer, slow and calm. When he raised a hand, the horse tensed, muscles rippling like a wave. For a second, Jacob saw his own reflection in its eyes. Tired, lonely, afraid to be touched. He let his hand fall back to his side. "You don't have to trust me," he whispered. "Just don't give up yet." The horse snorted, a cloud of breath curling between them. Jacob took a step back, giving it space. He leaned against the post, listening to the rhythm of its breathing. Outside, laughter echoed again, closer this time. A thud, a rattle, then the sharp crack of glass against the wall. Someone had thrown a bottle. Jacob walked to the doorway. Through the dim yard, he saw figures retreating down the hill, their voices fading into the night. He didn't chase them, didn't shout. He just closed the barn door, locking it gently. He turned to Raven, who was still trembling. "They don't know you," he said. "They don't know me either." He picked up the broken glass, tossed it into a bin, and sat back down on the hay. Raven's eyes followed him, the wildness fading just a little. "Tomorrow," Jacob murmured, "we'll start again." The words hung in the stillness, fragile as morning dew. When he finally rose to leave, Raven took one slow step forward. Jacob stopped, turned. The horse lowered its head. Not much, just enough to acknowledge something neither could name. "Good night, friend," Jacob said, his voice barely a breath. And when he closed the door behind him, the wind carried the faint sound of hooves shifting in straw, soft, steady, alive. The morning after the bottle shattered against the barn wall, Jacob found a single shard of glass lodged in the soil near the trough. It glittered in the sunlight, sharp and harmless now. He picked it up, turned it between his fingers, then tossed it into a bucket of scrap metal. Behind him, Raven stood quiet, watching, its nostrils flaring softly in the cool air. The horse's eyes followed every movement, not fearful anymore, just alert, like it was learning who this man truly was. Jacob poured water into the trough. The bucket was heavy. His shoulder ached from years of work that never seemed to end. "You're not the only one with scars," he said under his breath. When he turned, he saw Raven step closer, one cautious stride, then another. The sunlight caught its mane, turning it almost blue-black. He set the bucket down and backed away slowly. "Go on," he murmured. "It's yours." Raven dipped its head and drank. The sound of water echoed through the barn, soft, rhythmic, alive. Jacob leaned against the wall, letting the moment stretch until it felt sacred. After days of suspicion and distance, this simple act, the horse drinking near him, wasn't just a routine. It was a conversation without words, a fragile truce built from patience. Outside, the wind rustled through the dry grass. The faint hum of a truck approached from the road. Jacob stepped outside, hand shading his eyes. Martha's old pickup rolled through the gate, kicking up dust. She climbed out, hair tied back, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans spotted with dirt. In her arms were a few small boxes. "Morning," she said. "Morning. I brought something." She lifted one box, salve, bandages, and oats. "Figured your friend could use a proper meal, and maybe some healing." Jacob hesitated, before nodding. "Appreciate it." As she stepped into the barn, Raven tensed, ears flicking back. Martha moved with slow precision, speaking softly as she set the box down. "Hey there, big guy. I won't hurt you." Her voice was calm, grounded, the same tone she used with the half-wild colts she treated around the county. Jacob stood near the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't interfere. Martha reached for a brush, gently running it along Raven's neck. The horse flinched, then stilled. Dust rose in faint clouds under the sunlight pouring through the slats. "You see?" she whispered. "Doesn't take much. Just a little time." Jacob watched her work, the way her hands seemed to speak without needing words. The sight stirred something in him he hadn't felt since before the accident. A quiet belief that people could still be kind without wanting anything in return. When Martha turned, she smiled faintly. "He's stronger than he looks, but you already knew that." "I did," Jacob said, voice low. "Most folks don't believe strength looks like this. Most folks are afraid of what they don't understand." He nodded. "That makes two of us." For a long while, they stood in silence. The only sound was Raven breathing. When Martha finally left, she paused by the door. "Jacob," she said, "don't let their laughter make you forget why you did this." He met her eyes. "It's not about proving them wrong." "Then what's it about?" He looked back at the horse, still calm in the stall. "About giving something the chance no one gave me." Martha said nothing more. She just smiled, that kind of sad smile that carried too much truth, and climbed back into her truck. The engine sputtered, coughed, then faded down the road. As dusk fell, Jacob sat by the barn again. The air was heavy with the scent of hay and cedar. A half-moon hung above the fields, pale against the darkening sky. He took the brush Martha had left and stepped closer to Raven. The horse shifted, but didn't retreat. Slowly, Jacob reached out and brushed along its neck. Each stroke loosened dirt and dried sweat, revealing the shimmer of its coat beneath. The rhythm of the motion, soft, steady, felt like a heartbeat returning to an old, quiet place. When he spoke, it wasn't to the horse, but to the stillness itself. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "Someone who used to believe I could be better than my mistakes." The brush slipped from his hand. He caught it, sighed, and set it aside. Raven turned its head, eyes catching the lamplight. For the first time, Jacob thought he saw something that wasn't fear, something that looked almost like curiosity. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're both learning." He walked outside to the porch. The stars were coming out, scattered like ashes across the sky. From the road, faint headlights passed, the last of the day's traffic. The wind carried a distant echo of voices from town, laughter maybe, or gossip. It didn't sting like before. Jacob leaned against the post, looking toward the barn. He saw the faint outline of Raven lying down in the straw, breathing slow and deep. The sight pulled at something inside him, a thread tied to an old grief that finally loosened just enough to let the air in. The porch light flickered once and went out. In the dark, he felt a quiet kind of peace, the kind that doesn't shout or demand, just sits with you until the noise fades. Somewhere far away, a coyote called. Jacob smiled to himself. "Guess we're both still here," he said softly. Inside the barn, the horse stirred, one ear flicking at the sound of his voice. Jacob didn't see it, but if he had, he might have noticed how still the night had become, how even the wind seemed to pause, as if listening. The day began like any other, quiet, almost tender. The fields shimmered under the early light, and the faint rhythm of Raven's breathing was the only sound breaking the silence. Jacob was repairing the south fence when he heard the truck engines in the distance. The sound didn't belong to morning. It was too sharp, too restless. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, squinting toward the road. A cloud of dust rose. 3 trucks rolled in, engines rumbling low like thunder. The first stopped at the gate. The others followed, carrying 6, maybe 7 men. Faces Jacob knew too well. They were farmers, ranch hands, old drinking buddies who now looked at him like he was something unclean. The man in front, a tall one named Grady, jumped out. "Morning, Hill," he called, voice too casual. "We heard your monster's getting too comfortable." Jacob didn't move. "You should leave." Grady grinned, pulling a cigarette from his shirt pocket. "We will. Just thought we'd check the fences. Can't have that thing breaking loose, can we?" The men laughed, short, cruel bursts that scattered across the yard like pebbles against metal. One of them kicked at the mud near the trough, leaving a print that glistened in the sun. "You've had your fun," Jacob said quietly. "Now go." Grady's smile faded. "You really think you can keep it? After what it did?" Jacob didn't answer. The air between them thickened. The wind dropped. Then another voice rose from the back, colder, meaner. He's protecting it because he's like it. Killer and monster, same thing. The words hung there. Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Rage, grief, or maybe just exhaustion from years of being their favorite ghost. "Get off my land," he said. Grady flicked his cigarette to the dirt and crushed it under his boot. "You've lost it, Hill." He glanced at the barn. "Maybe we should help you see sense." The men started walking toward the barn. Jacob stepped in their path, his body stiff, jaw clenched. "You take one more step and I'll—" "You'll what?" Grady sneered. Jacob didn't. Finish. He didn't have to. The barn door creaked open behind him, and Raven's shadow spilled across the ground. The horse stood there, massive and black against the dim light, its breath fogging in the air. For a moment, everything froze. The men stared. Raven's muscles rippled, tail flicking, ears flat against its skull. "See?" one man whispered. "It's a demon." Grady stepped forward, voice trembling but loud. "That thing should have died the night it killed Mark's brother. Let's end it now." Jacob's voice cracked through the air. "Don't." But it was too late. Someone threw a rock. It hit the side of the barn with a dull thud. Raven screamed, a raw, piercing sound that tore through the quiet. It reared, hooves striking the air, and the ground trembled under its weight. The men stumbled back, but fear only made them crueler. Another rock flew, then another. One of the men grabbed a half-empty can of fuel from the truck bed. "Stop!" Jacob shouted, rushing forward. "You'll burn the whole damn place down!" "Then maybe we'll finally be safe," Grady yelled. He splashed the fuel near the barn wall. The sharp, chemical smell filled the air. Jacob lunged, grabbing his arm, and they struggled. The can fell, rolling, spilling its contents into the dirt. In the chaos, someone lit a match. The tiny flame wavered, caught the wind, then kissed the ground. The fire spread fast. It leapt up the boards, orange tongues licking the old dry wood. The men shouted, scattering, their bravery burning away faster than the kindling. Inside, Raven thrashed, chained to the stall post. Jacob ran toward the flames. "Hold on," he yelled, covering his face with his arm. Smoke poured through the cracks, turning the air to ash. He could hear the horses' cries, hoarse, panicked, desperate. The heat was unbearable. He found the chain, tugging at it, coughing. "Come on, boy, come on!" Raven jerked back, eyes wild with terror. Jacob yanked the latch, the metal scalding hot. It snapped open. The horse surged forward, knocking him off his feet. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but then, miraculously, Raven turned. Instead of bolting, it pressed its shoulder against a burning beam, pushing it aside. The crash sent sparks flying into the sky. Jacob crawled backward, choking, eyes watering. Raven stood over him for a heartbeat, firelight reflecting off its black coat like molten glass. Then it lowered its head, nudging him, urging him up. "Go!" Jacob gasped. "Get out!" But the horse wouldn't leave. Flames climbed higher. The roof groaned. A beam fell, striking the ground beside them. Raven reared, screamed again, then lunged forward, shoving Jacob toward the open door. He stumbled out into the cool air, collapsing in the mud. Behind him, the barn exploded into a roaring inferno. The men had gathered at a distance, their faces ghostly in the firelight. No one spoke. They watched as the monster they feared stood in the doorway, framed by fire, smoke rising around its silhouette. Then, with a final heave, Raven charged through the flames and out into the night, its mane trailing embers like a comet tail. Jacob lay there, coughing, every breath a knife. The horse circled once, chest heaving, eyes wide but steady. When Jacob reached a trembling hand toward it, Raven lowered its head, pressed its forehead against his shoulder, and exhaled. The crowd stood silent. Even Grady couldn't look away. The fire crackled, devouring the last of the old barn, but no one dared move. Jacob whispered hoarsely, "You see? It's not a monster." No one answered. One by one, the men turned and walked back to their trucks. The engines started, taillights vanishing down the road. Only the sheriff's siren approached now, blue light sweeping across the fields. Jacob sat in the mud beside Raven, both of them covered in soot. The horse stood still, trembling but unbroken. Smoke curled into the sky, rising toward the stars, like a confession. When Sheriff Mark arrived, he saw the wreckage, the fire dying, the men gone, Jacob alive. He climbed out of the cruiser, disbelief on his face. "What the hell happened here?" Jacob didn't answer. He just stroked Raven's neck, voice raw. "They were wrong." The sheriff looked at the horse, its body blackened with soot, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. For a moment, the lawman said nothing. Then, quietly, he took off his hat. The night was silent again, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the soft sound of a man breathing beside the creature everyone once feared. By dawn, the fire had eaten everything it could. Only the black skeleton of the barn stood against a bruised sky, smoke rising in thin, tired ribbons. The scent of charred wood hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Jacob sat on the ground near the fence line, knees drawn up, his jacket stiff with soot. Raven stood a few feet away, its body streaked with ash, a patch of burnt hair along its flank. The horse's chest rose and fell in slow, labored rhythm, steam curling from its nostrils like ghosts. Sheriff Mark stayed until the flames died out. He'd ordered the men to keep their distance, though most had already fled, too ashamed to watch. When the fire finally surrendered, the sheriff walked over to Jacob, his boots crunching in the brittle soil. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly. Jacob didn't look up. Luck had nothing to do with it. Mark followed his gaze toward Raven, who stood motionless amid the smoldering remains. "That thing saved you?" Jacob's voice cracked. "More than once." The sheriff sighed, ran a hand over his face. "Folks will want answers. You can't keep that animal here anymore." "Then where does it go?" Jacob asked. His tone was calm, almost empty. "You gonna shoot it?" Mark hesitated. The wind carried the faint creak of collapsing wood, the last whisper of the barn that once sheltered Jacob's family. He looked down. "No," he said finally. "Not after what I saw." Jacob nodded once, then pushed himself to his feet. His legs trembled from exhaustion. He walked to Raven, resting a hand against the horse's neck. The skin was hot, trembling under his palm. "You did good," he whispered. "You did real good." Raven turned its head, pressing its muzzle gently into his shoulder. Jacob closed his eyes. The world around them smelled of smoke and forgiveness. By afternoon, word of the fire had spread. The same mouths that once called him crazy now spoke his name with unease. At the diner, the waitress turned down the radio when two farmers entered, their voices low. They say the horse saved him, one muttered. The other shook his head. Maybe he's got that whole town cursed. Barn's gone, but he's still walking. Ain't right. Behind the counter, Martha listened, but didn't speak. When she set down the coffee pot, her hands trembled slightly. She wiped them on her apron and went to the back room, where her phone sat charging. A single text blinked on the screen. Jacob, are you okay? He hadn't answered yet. Back at the farm, Jacob worked through the ruins. The ground was still warm under his boots. He used a rake to pull charred boards aside, searching for anything that might still resemble memory. A nail box, a rusted horseshoe, a tin frame blackened by smoke. He found the corner of an old photo, edges curled, image melted away. He held it for a moment, then let it crumble between his fingers. The wind picked up, scattering ashes into the sky. Raven followed him as he moved, limping slightly but refusing to rest. Every now and then, the horse would lower its head and nudge aside debris, as if helping in its own way. Jacob stopped, watching. Guess you don't like seeing things broken either, he said. Raven flicked its ears, huffed, and kept searching. Hours passed. The sky deepened from gray to amber, streaked with thin clouds that glowed like bruises in the fading sun. Jacob finally sat down on a pile of old boards, wiping sweat and ash from his forehead. His hands shook when he lit a cigarette. He hadn't smoked in years, not since his wife hated the smell. But now, the habit came back like an old ghost he didn't have the strength to banish. When he exhaled, the smoke mingled with the air, one cloud of gray lost among countless others. He looked at the horizon. You should have seen it, Mary, he whispered to the wind. That horse, he ran into the fire like he knew what it meant. A soft sound made him turn. Martha's truck rolled through the gate. She climbed out, hair pulled back, face pale from worry. God, Jacob, she said, voice breaking. You look like hell. Feels worse. She stepped closer, eyes sweeping over the wreckage. You could have died. Would have, he said, nodding toward Raven. If not for him. Martha walked to the horse. Careful, reverent. She touched its neck, fingers grazing the burnt hair. Raven stood still, the faintest tremor rippling through its body. He's hurt, she said. I know, Jacob murmured. He doesn't complain much. She looked at him. Neither do you. He smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Doesn't do much good, does it? Martha didn't reply. She fetched water, gauze, ointment from her truck. As she cleaned Raven's wounds, Jacob watched in silence, his expression unreadable. The rhythm of her hands, the horse's soft breathing, and the distant hum of cicadas filled the air. Small, ordinary sounds that made the world seem whole again, if only for a moment. When they finished, Martha leaned against the fence beside him. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it gold. You can rebuild, she said gently. I'll help. Jacob shook his head. I'm tired of rebuilding things that just burn again. Then build something that doesn't, she said. He looked at her, puzzled. Not a barn, she continued. Trust. Maybe in people. Maybe in him. She nodded toward Raven. Or maybe just in yourself. Jacob didn't answer. He stared at the horizon until the last light slipped away. Night fell heavy. The farm was quiet again. Jacob lay on the porch, too tired to move, the stars swimming above him. The wind smelled of smoke and wet grass. Somewhere nearby, Raven shifted, hooves crunching softly in the dirt. He turned his head, watching the dark silhouette of the horse against the half-moon, It stood guard, motionless, head lifted as if listening for threats. Jacob's eyes stung, not from smoke this time, but from something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he whispered. The words barely left his mouth, but Raven's ears twitched, and the horse turned slightly, as if hearing them. In that quiet exchange, the world softened. The laughter from the town, the whispers, the anger, all of it fell away, until only the sound of breath remained. The next morning, Martha returned with plywood and nails. Sheriff Mark came too, carrying a thermos of coffee. None of them spoke much. Together, they built a temporary shelter beside the ruins, small but sturdy. The rhythm of hammers echoed through the air like a heartbeat. When the last board was nailed in place, Jacob stepped back, staring at it. "It's ugly," he said. Mark chuckled. "So are most things that last." Raven snorted behind them, as if agreeing. For the first time, Jacob laughed. A quiet, broken sound, but laughter all the same. The courthouse in Weston was small enough that everyone knew where to sit without being told. The benches creaked with the weight of townsfolk, people who had watched the fire from afar, who had whispered Jacob's name in both blame and pity. The walls smelled of dust and coffee, the faint hum of ceiling fans blending with low murmurs. The morning sun fell, through narrow windows, casting long, deliberate shadows across the worn floorboards. Jacob sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped, shirt collar open. His face was still marked with faint burns, and his palms were rough with ash. Beside him, Sheriff Mark leaned forward, hat on his knee, eyes fixed ahead. Across the room, a wooden sign read, "Town Hearing. Incident at Hill Farm." The word incident felt small compared to the truth. Martha sat behind Jacob, arms folded tightly across her chest. She had barely slept. When she entered, whispers followed her, the woman who kept visiting the mad farmer. But she didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, her silence louder than their judgment. The town clerk cleared his throat, beginning the proceedings. "This hearing concerns the events of June 10th, when a structure fire at the Hill property endangered public safety. Several witnesses claim the horse in question, known locally as the Monster Horse, was responsible for violent behavior prior to the event." Jacob didn't move. He kept his gaze on the table, jaw tight. The mayor adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Hill, we're not here to persecute you, only to ensure the safety of this community. Would you like to make a statement?" Jacob looked up slowly. His voice was steady, but low. "They came to burn it, the horse. Said they were protecting the town." The mayor nodded carefully. "And you believe that justified what happened?" "I don't justify it," Jacob said. "I survived it." The room shifted. Someone coughed. Another muttered, "He's still defending that beast." The mayor leaned forward. "Mr. Hill, that animal has killed before. You understand why people are frightened." Jacob met his gaze. "You think fear makes us right?" The mayor's lips pressed together. No answer ready. Before he could respond, a voice from the back spoke up. "I saw it." Everyone turned. It was Martha. Her voice was clear, trembling only at the edges. "I was there after the fire. That horse didn't start it. It saved him." The mayor frowned. "Ms. Sloan, you have proof of this?" She nodded. "I do." She lifted her phone. "I recorded it." Gasps rippled through the room. Jacob turned slightly, eyes narrowing in disbelief. Martha walked forward, handed the phone to the clerk. The small screen glowed as the footage played, grainy but powerful. On the display, flames leapt skyward. Amid the chaos, Raven burst through the fire, dragging Jacob by the collar, shielding him from falling debris. The room fell utterly silent, except for the faint crackle of the recording. Then it ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the mayor's hand froze on the gavel. Finally, Sheriff Mark stood. "I saw the aftermath myself. That horse stood guard until we arrived. If that's not proof of instinct, or loyalty, I don't know what is." The mayor's eyes dropped to his notes. "And the men who attacked your property?" Jacob's voice hardened. "Gone. Same as every time something ugly happens in this town. Gone before morning." Someone in the crowd stood abruptly. A large man, shoulders stooped, hat twisting in his hands. His face was red, eyes glassy. "It was me," he said quietly. "I was there. I threw the first rock." Murmurs swept through the benches. "I thought we were doing the right thing," the man continued, voice breaking. "That thing scared us all. But when it came out of the fire..." He stopped, shaking his head. "I don't know what I saw anymore. It wasn't hate. It looked human." He sank back into his seat. The silence that followed was heavier than judgment. Jacob turned slightly toward him. Their eyes met. "Fear makes monsters out of us all," Jacob said softly. The mayor exhaled. "I think that's enough." He looked around the room, then down at his papers. "Mr. Hill, the council finds no cause for criminal action. You are free to go. As for the animal, its fate rests with the county vet. But after what we've heard, I believe there's no reason to destroy it." The gavel struck once, echoing through the room like thunder breaking after a long drought. Jacob stood slowly. His legs felt heavy, but the air seemed lighter. Martha rose behind him, a smile flickering in her tired eyes. Sheriff Mark nodded once, a quiet salute. As the crowd dispersed, a few townspeople lingered, some offering awkward nods, others avoiding his gaze. For the first time, no one laughed. Outside, the sun had burned through the morning haze. The courthouse steps gleamed pale under its warmth. Jacob paused at the bottom, breathing in the clean air. Martha joined him, phone still in her hand. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied, "but you would have done it for me." He smiled faintly. "I wouldn't have thought of recording it." "That's because you still think people will believe the truth without proof." Jacob chuckled, a quiet, broken sound. "Guess I'm old-fashioned." They started walking toward her truck. Across the street, a few onlookers watched, eyes softening as they passed. Jacob didn't notice them at first, but when he did, he tipped his hat politely. None of them looked away. When they reached the truck, Martha turned to him. "So what now?" He looked toward the open fields stretching beyond town. "Now?" He smiled, small but sure. "Now we let the quiet do the talking." That evening, Jacob returned to the farm. The sky was painted with gold and violet, the fields whispering in the wind. Raven stood near the half-built shelter, head low, grazing lazily. When Jacob approached, the horse lifted its head and snorted softly. "Guess they let us off easy," Jacob said, brushing its neck. "You made believers out of a few today." Raven nudged his shoulder, breath warm against his skin. Jacob laughed under his breath. "Yeah, I know. You're Still the same stubborn bastard." He looked around the farm, the ashes now cold, the new boards gleaming pale under the fading light. For the first time in a long while, he didn't see ruin. He saw space. Space to rebuild, to breathe, to begin again. "Let's see what tomorrow looks like," he whispered. As the last light faded, Raven's dark form moved beside him, the two shadows merging into one against the horizon. Summer deepened quietly in Weston County. The air grew heavy with the smell of cut hay and sun-warmed earth. Days stretched long, slow, and forgiving. The kind of days that asked for nothing but breathing. Jacob's farm, once a place of whispers and smoke, had begun to look like land again. Grass pushed through the scorched soil, the wind carried the hum of crickets instead of fire. The hearing was over, but the town hadn't quite decided what to do with its guilt. Some folks crossed the street when they saw Jacob. Others stopped by with offerings. Feed sacks, scrap lumber, even a pie or two wrapped in tinfoil. They'd stand at his gate, trying not to meet his eyes, mumbling something about helping rebuild. Jacob would thank them, polite but distant. He didn't want their pity, only their quiet. Raven had healed slowly. The burn along its flank had turned into a dark scar that shimmered faintly under sunlight. A badge of survival. Jacob kept the stall door open now. The horse came and went as it pleased. Some nights, he'd hear it wandering the field, hooves muffled in the tall grass, as if tracing the borders of freedom, but never quite leaving. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Martha returned. She wore no makeup, no smile, just the ease of someone who'd finally stopped pretending life had to be loud to matter. She brought him a thermos of coffee and a few old photographs she'd found in the county archives. "Found these in a box labeled Weston County Fair, 1997, she said, spreading them across the table. One showed a younger Jacob with his wife and boy, standing beside a prize-winning horse. The woman's hand rested on his shoulder. The boy's grin was all sunlight. Jacob looked at the photo for a long time. "Feels like another lifetime," he murmured. Martha nodded. It was. He traced the edge of the picture, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. "Back then, I thought the world would always be kind if I just worked hard enough." "It isn't kind," Martha said gently. "But it can still be good." They drank their coffee in silence. Outside, Raven grazed near the fence, the evening light painting its coat silver. When the wind shifted, Jacob caught the faint scent of wildflowers. A small mercy carried through the dust. In town, the stories had changed. At the diner, someone pinned a clipping from the Chronicle on the wall. "Farmer and monster horse cleared of wrongdoing." Below it, another headline read, "Sheriff praises courage amid fire." But time, as always, dulls even miracles. Within weeks, people stopped talking about the horse at all. The gossip turned to crops, taxes, the county fair. And though Jacob didn't miss the attention, the sudden quiet felt strange, like a bell that had stopped ringing but still echoed inside his chest. He started fixing the fences that stretched toward the north pasture, taking it slow. Every swing of the hammer echoed across the fields, steady and patient. Raven often followed him, walking a few steps behind, stopping whenever Jacob stopped. It was a rhythm now. One man, one animal, both finding comfort in repetition. At night, the farmhouse felt less empty. Jacob still caught himself talking to the air, expecting answers from people long gone. Sometimes he'd tell stories to the horse instead, about the first time his son had ridden bareback, or the time his wife had taught him to dance under a porch light. Raven would stand there, listening, tail flicking lazily, as if it understood. "Funny thing," Jacob said one night, leaning against the fence. "I thought I was saving you." He paused, the words settling in the warm dark. "But you're the one keeping me here." Raven blew out a soft breath, lowering its head until it nearly touched his shoulder. Jacob smiled. "Guess we'll call it even." A week later, Sheriff Mark stopped by. He parked near the gate and stood for a while, just watching. "Town's quieter these days," he said finally. "That's how I like it." Mark nodded. "You know, people still argue about you. Some say you're stubborn. Others think you're some kind of saint." Jacob chuckled. "Neither's true. I just stopped caring what they think." The sheriff smiled faintly. "You earned that right." He glanced toward Raven, who stood near the edge of the field, tail swaying. "You keeping him?" "As long as he wants to stay." Mark tipped his hat. "Fair enough." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were wrong." "About what?" "That horse being the end of you." Jacob grinned, the first honest grin in months. "Yeah, me too." The sheriff left soon after. Jacob watched the dust trail vanish down the road, then turned back to the fields. The sun was sinking again, the light soft and gold. He leaned on the fence and breathed deep. For the first time in years, he didn't taste bitterness, only earth, smoke, and the faint sweetness of summer. That night, the farm was still. Jacob sat on the porch, listening to the distant rustle of wind through wheat. The world felt larger somehow, not because it had changed, but because he had stopped trying to shrink it to fit his grief. He thought of Martha's words. It can still be good. Maybe she was right. From the darkness, Raven appeared at the edge of the yard. Its eyes caught the porch light, twin reflections of amber fire. Jacob smiled and whispered, "You can rest now." The horse didn't move for a while, then slowly lay down in the grass. The stars stretched endlessly above them, quiet and sure. Jacob leaned back, closing his eyes. He didn't need noise anymore. He didn't need forgiveness. Just this. Stillness. Breath. The long silence that comes when life finally stops demanding answers. The morning broke soft and gold, the kind of morning that didn't promise anything, just light. The wheat swayed in slow, tired movements, whispering against the breeze. Jacob woke before dawn, as he always did now. He made coffee, poured half into a chipped mug, and half into a tin bowl for the steam to chase away the chill. When he stepped outside, Raven was already waiting by the gate, head lowered, breath rising like smoke in the cool air. "Early bird, huh?" Jacob murmured. The horse flicked its ear, but didn't move closer. There was something different in its stillness that morning, an unease Jacob couldn't name. He leaned on the fence, watching the horizon turn from gray to pink. Martha had been by the evening before, bringing new feed and a story about a rancher 2 towns over who'd heard about the horse that walked through fire. Jacob had smiled, said people would turn anything into legend if they were bored enough. She'd laughed softly, then looked at him for a long time before saying, "You've done enough, Jacob. Maybe it's time to let him live, not just survive." He hadn't answered then. But now, as the wind shifted and Raven's mane caught the first light of day, he knew she was right. He walked to the barn, what little of it remained, and grabbed the rope, the halter, a few carrots. Raven watched every movement, eyes steady, unblinking. When Jacob opened the gate, the horse stepped back, uncertain. "It's all right," Jacob said, voice calm. "We're not going far." He led Raven down the dirt road that wound behind the house, through the meadow where the wildflowers had begun to bloom again. The air smelled clean, washed of smoke and ash. Ravens called from the treetops, and a fox darted across the path ahead of them. The world felt awake in a way Jacob hadn't felt in years. When they reached the edge of the hill, he stopped. Below stretched the valley, endless grass, the faint shimmer of a creek, the broken fence line fading into open land. He took a deep breath. "This is where she's buried," he said softly. "Mary, right over there by that oak." Raven turned its head, nostrils flaring as if scenting something beyond the living. Jacob set down the rope and walked ahead. The grave was simple, just a small wooden cross and a few stones that had weathered pale over time. He knelt, brushed the dust from the name carved faintly into the wood. "I kept meaning to fix this," he whispered. "Guess I never got around to it." Raven followed, stopping a few steps away. The horse lowered its head and blew a slow breath over the ground, stirring the dry petals of wild daisies scattered at the grave's edge. Jacob's chest tightened. For a long moment, man and horse stood together in silence, the kind that didn't ask for understanding. It simply was. He reached out, hand trembling, and laid it on Raven's neck. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You never did." The horse blinked, dark lashes catching the sunlight. Jacob smiled, tired but certain. "You're free now." He untied the rope, letting it fall to the ground. The small sound seemed to echo louder than the wind. Raven didn't move at first. Its ears flicked, head tilting slightly as if waiting for a command. Jacob stepped back. "Go on," he whispered. "Find something better than what's left here." The horse's muscles tensed, then released. With a powerful exhale, it turned, trotted a few paces, then broke into a run. Dust rose in golden spirals as it crossed the open field, each stride longer, stronger, freer. Jacob watched, the wind catching at his shirt, eyes following the dark figure until it became a blur against the horizon. He didn't call after it, didn't wave, just stood there until the only thing left was the rustle of the grass and the sound of his own heartbeat. By afternoon, the sky had turned pale blue, thin clouds drifting like breath. Jacob sat by the grave, his hat resting on his knee. He wasn't crying, though his eyes burned. He felt emptied out, but not hollow, like a weight had been set down, one he hadn't realized he was carrying all this time. He spoke softly, half to Mary, half to himself. "He'll be all right. He's stronger than most people I know." He chuckled under his breath. "You'd have liked him." A breeze swept across the hill, rustling the grass around the cross. For a second it sounded like laughter, hers, faint and far away. Jacob closed his eyes, letting it pass through him. When he opened them again, he noticed something shimmering near the horizon, a dark shape moving along the ridge. Raven, pausing at the crest of the hill, had turned back. The distance between them stretched endless and silent, but somehow it didn't feel like goodbye. Jacob raised his hand slowly. The horse lifted its head higher, mane catching the sun like a crown, then turned once more and vanished beyond the ridge. That night, the farm slept without sound. The moon rose full and clean, silvering the broken fence posts and the open gate. Jacob sat on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders, coffee cooling in his hand. Every now and then, he'd glance toward the empty field, half expecting to see that dark silhouette appear again. But it didn't. Instead, there was peace, a quiet so deep, it felt alive. Somewhere in that silence, Jacob realized what Martha had meant. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about standing still long enough to let something beautiful keep moving. He leaned back, exhaling, eyes closing against the night breeze. The crickets sang. The stars trembled faintly above him. "Run far," he whispered. "Don't look back." Winter came slow to Weston County that year, curling its fingers through the valley, one frost at a time. The mornings carried a crisp silence, the kind that felt almost holy. Jacob's farm, small and quiet, had settled into a kind of peace that didn't need witnesses. The fields were bare now, pale gold against the gray sky. Every fence post, every scar of fire, every rebuilt board held a story the world had already begun to forget. It had been nearly a year since Raven ran beyond the ridge. Some nights Jacob still caught himself listening for the sound of hooves, that steady rhythm that once filled the silence between his breaths. But the fields stayed still. Time, as it does, had folded the noise of that past life into something softer. The townspeople, too, had changed in their quiet way. The same faces that once mocked him now nodded from across the street. The laughter that used to follow him had thinned into respect. Or maybe guilt, but Jacob never held it against them. He'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting the wind carry the weight for you. He kept busy, repaired tractors for neighbors, tended the new crop, helped Martha with her small vet clinic on the outskirts of town. She would show up every few days, her hands smelling of hay and antiseptic, bringing him stories about horses she'd treated or the silly things the sheriff said. She'd make coffee, tease him about the dirt on his boots, and sometimes sit on the porch with him until the sky turned blue-black. They didn't talk much about the past. There was no need. The silence between them was full of everything they didn't have to say. One morning in late February, Jacob found an envelope wedged in the gate post. No name, just his address scribbled in a shaky hand. Inside was a clipping from the county paper. Sightings of a black stallion reported near the Old Creek Trail. Beneath it, someone had written, "Could it be yours?" Jacob read the line 3 times. His pulse thudded, quiet but sure. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. That evening, he took his old truck and drove toward the trail. The road twisted through bare cottonwoods and long stretches of open land where wind moved like water. When he reached the creek, he parked, cut the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of snow and river stone. He waited. The sky dimmed, the horizon melting into silver. Then, faint and far away, he heard it, the sound he'd dreamed about for months. Hooves, slow and deliberate, breaking the crust of frozen mud. Out of the shadows came a shape, large, dark, gleaming faintly under the moonlight. Raven. Older, leaner, but unmistakable. The horse stopped at the edge of the creek, head tilted, ears twitching. For a long time, neither moved. The distance between them was thick with memory. Jacob's throat tightened. "You found your way back," he whispered. Raven snorted softly, as if answering. Then, in a gesture that felt almost unreal, it stepped into the shallow water, each step slow, deliberate. When it reached the other side, it lowered its head to him. Jacob raised a trembling hand. The space between them closed. His palm met the warmth of the horse's muzzle. It was like touching time itself, fragile, infinite. "I missed you," Jacob said. The horse breathed against his chest, a sound somewhere between sigh and song. For a moment, the world felt perfectly still. He didn't try to take it home, didn't tie it, didn't lead it. He simply stood there, hand resting against its neck, letting the moment exist. The wind picked up, rustling through the dry reeds, and he knew it was time. "You belong out here," Jacob murmured. "Don't let anyone cage you again." Raven lifted its head, eyes reflecting the moon. Then, as if understanding, it turned and trotted away, into the open field, into the night. Jacob watched until it disappeared completely, swallowed by distance and stars. He stayed by the creek long after, the cold seeping into his bones. But he didn't move. He didn't need to. Something inside him had unlatched for good. Spring came early that year. When the thaw set in, the town gathered at the edge of Main Street, where workers erected a small wooden statue. It wasn't grand, just a carving of a man and a horse, standing side by side, both looking toward the horizon. On the base, the inscription read, "He saw what others feared, and listened when no one else would." The unveiling drew a quiet crowd. The sheriff said a few words, his voice steady but soft. Martha stood beside Jacob, her gloved hand brushing against his. When the tarp came down, a hush fell over everyone. Jacob didn't smile, but his eyes glistened. He hadn't asked for any of it, the statue, the speeches, the nods of approval, but he understood what it meant. It wasn't about him. It was about what they'd learned. That courage doesn't always look like strength, and kindness doesn't always need witnesses. After the ceremony, people lingered, touching the carving as if it might carry some of the peace they'd long lost. For once, no one laughed. Martha turned to him. "You all right?" Jacob nodded slowly. "Yeah. For the first time, I think I am." As the crowd drifted away, the sky began to darken, streaks of orange and blue stretching across it. Jacob stayed until the square emptied, the statue casting its long shadow toward the fields. Somewhere far beyond that horizon, he imagined Raven running, free, unafraid, a dark streak against the fading light. He whispered, "Keep running, partner." Then he walked home, his steps light, his heart steady. The evening breeze followed him down the long road, carrying with it a faint echo of laughter. Not cruel this time, but warm, like the sound of a world learning how to breathe again. And on that day, for the first time in years, the town of Weston stopped laughing. If this story touched your heart, tell me what you felt in the comments, even just a few words. Did it remind you of someone you once knew, or something you once lost? Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next story might be the one that stays with you forever.